The forests around Pripyat are quiet now. Birch and pine rise through concrete. Grass grows where streets once ran straight toward the power plant. It has been nearly 40 years since the explosion at Reactor Number 4. The sound of that night still hangs over this place. 2 miles north, the city of Pripyat was once home to 50,000 people, engineers, workers, and families of those who ran the Chernobyl nuclear power station. Today, the only movement is wind through the windows and the slow turn of a rusted Ferris wheel. At the heart of the exclusion zone stands the remains of the reactor itself. It is sealed now beneath layers of steel and concrete, but the story began long before that night. On April 25, 1986, a safety test was being prepared. The purpose was routine, to simulate a power failure and see how long the turbines could keep coolant water flowing. It was supposed to last only a few minutes. Inside the control room, the night shift prepared for the test. Operators lowered the reactor's power, adjusted the valves, and waited for the signal to begin. They did not know that the delay ordered earlier in the day had already made the reactor dangerously unstable. One of the men on duty that night remembers the moment everything changed. "At first there was a low sound," he said, "a vibration that came through the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling. Then the lights went out. The control panels flickered. Emergency generators tried to start, but for 45 seconds there was nothing. Then came a deep rolling noise, a sound that seemed to rise from the ground itself. "It wasn't fear," he said. "Not yet. We thought it was another malfunction, but what followed was not a malfunction. It was the beginning of the worst nuclear accident in human history. When the explosion came, it was like the tearing of the earth. The lid of Reactor 4, a 2,000-ton steel plate, was thrown aside. The building shook, walls cracked, and in the darkness, a column of blue light shot into the sky. Inside, the operators could not see what had happened. They believed the reactor was still intact. They tried to restore coolant to a core that no longer existed. Outside, over Pripyat, the night glowed faintly. Many residents stepped onto balconies to look toward the power plant. Few understood that the dust floating through the air was radioactive. The man who heard that first low hum survived. He spent only 10 minutes near the reactor before being evacuated. Later, he was sent to a hospital in Moscow with severe radiation exposure. "We didn't know," he said quietly. "We did our jobs. We followed orders. No one told us what we were standing next to." Chernobyl was meant to be the pride of the Soviet Union, proof that their technology could light the world. Instead, it became a monument to silence. The Ferris wheel in Pripyat never turned again. The laughter stopped, and for those who were there that night, time itself seemed to stop with it. The story of Chernobyl begins long before the explosion. It begins in the decades when the Soviet Union looked toward the atom as its promise for the future. After the Second World War, the USSR was rebuilding a shattered nation. Its cities were in ruins, but its ambitions were vast. Nuclear power became the symbol of progress, clean, powerful, and modern. In Moscow, it was said that whoever mastered the atom would master the century. By the 1960s, Soviet engineers had designed their own reactor, a powerful and cost-effective model known as the RBMK. It was capable of producing enormous energy at a fraction of the cost of Western designs. It was also unstable under certain conditions, a flaw hidden in classified reports that would never reach the workers who operated them. The first of these reactors was built in northern Ukraine, 60 miles north of Kyiv. The site was chosen for its access to water, transportation, and a young, skilled workforce. Around it, the Soviets built a city from nothing. Pripyat? Pripyat was meant to be the model city of the atomic age. Wide boulevards, schools, cinemas, playgrounds. The streets were lined with poplar trees. Its apartments were spacious by Soviet standards, stocked with furniture, color televisions, and full refrigerators. Life here was better than in most parts of the country. For the thousands who worked at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, it was a source of pride. Construction began in 1970. At the center of it was a young electrical engineer named Viktor Bryukhanov, appointed as the plant's first director. He had never run a nuclear facility before, but he was trusted, loyal to the party, and known for getting things done. The project was enormous. 6 reactors were planned, each one larger than the last. The goal was simple: to build the biggest nuclear power station in the world. Every deadline mattered. Every inspection was political. The Soviet Union was in competition not just with the United States, but with itself. Each republic racing to meet production quotas, each factory pushing to exceed targets. Under the banner of progress, corners were quietly cut. By 1977, the first reactor went online. 2 more followed within the decade. Reactor number 4, the largest, was completed in 1983. Each year, Chernobyl supplied more energy to the grid, powering homes, factories, and entire regions of the Soviet state. But within the control rooms, problems were already appearing. Instruments failed. Pressure valves leaked. A secret report in 1983 listed dozens of incidents, equipment failures, power surges, and radiation leaks. But the findings were locked away. No one outside the upper ranks ever saw them. Among those who worked there, the atmosphere was different. There was pride and exhaustion. Workers spent 12-hour shifts in the turbine halls, their boots echoing on metal floors. They knew the plant was ambitious, but few questioned its safety. In the Soviet Union, questioning was dangerous. By the mid-1980s, Chernobyl had become a symbol of modern Soviet achievement. Official films showed smiling families, clean laboratories, shining reactors. Visitors from Moscow called it the city of the future. But behind the facade, the system that kept it running was stretched thin. Maintenance was delayed, documentation incomplete, and critical safety tests postponed. Still, the plant continued to operate around the clock, feeding electricity into the national grid. For the men in charge, there was no room for hesitation. Production goals had to be met. Bonuses depended on deadlines. In that system, failure was never admitted. It was hidden. No one could see it then, but the foundation of the disaster had already been laid. It was not the fault of one man or one mistake. It was built slowly through years of pressure, pride, and silence. Chernobyl was meant to be proof that the Soviet dream could never fail. Instead, it would become proof that it could. April 25, 1986. Inside the control room of Reactor Number 4, the day begins like any other. The morning shift takes over at 8 a.m. Routine maintenance is underway. Engineers are preparing to conduct a safety test, one that has been delayed several times before. The purpose is simple: to simulate a power failure and confirm whether the turbines can generate enough electricity to keep the coolant pumps running until the backup diesel generators start. Every nuclear plant must prove this ability. Without it, a loss of power could lead to a dangerous rise in temperature inside the core. The test had been scheduled for earlier in the day. But at 2 p.m., the regional energy dispatcher in Kyiv calls with instructions: keep the reactor running. The national grid needs more power. The operators obey. For 9 more hours, the reactor continues at reduced output, waiting for permission to proceed. When the call finally comes, close to midnight, the day shift is long gone. A new team takes over, exhausted, underbriefed, and unaware that the long delay has already made the reactor unstable. Inside the control room, the atmosphere is calm but tense. Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov oversees the procedure. He is one of the few nuclear specialists on site, experienced, demanding, and feared. The operators under him include Leonid Toptunov, Alexander Akimov, and Boris Stolyarchuk. They are young men in their 20s, trained but inexperienced. The power reduction begins at 1 a.m. The plan is to lower the reactor's output to around 700 megawatts. But as control rods descend into the graphite core, the power drops far lower, almost to zero. This is not expected. It is dangerous. When power falls too low, a chemical imbalance begins inside the reactor. A gas called xenon-135 builds up, absorbing neutrons and choking the reaction. This is known as xenon poisoning. To recover the lost power, operators withdraw most of the control rods, a move strictly outside safety limits. The graphite-tipped rods now hang halfway out of the reactor, leaving it unstable but alive. Dyatlov insists the test continue. No one in the room argues for long. In the Soviet system, orders are not debated. By 1:15 a.m., the power stabilizes at 200 megawatts, less than 1/4 of what was planned. The cooling pumps are still running at full speed. Too much water is now flowing through the reactor, cooling it unevenly. Steam bubbles begin to form inside the fuel channels. Operators record fluctuating readings but are unsure what they mean. No one in the room truly understands what is happening inside the core. At 1:22 a.m., the test begins. 4 of the 8 coolant pumps are disconnected from the system. The turbines begin to spin down. Pressure in the reactor starts to fall. Then, suddenly, power begins to surge. Steam voids inside the reactor act as fuel for the chain reaction. Each second, the energy doubles. The men at the control panels watch the gauges jump off the scale. They have only one option left, the emergency shutdown button, known as AZ5. Akimov presses it. The control rods begin to descend into the core, but the graphite tips at their ends displace water and cause a brief, fatal spike in reactivity. It is an unforeseen flaw in the RBMK design. Within seconds, the reactor's power output increases 100-fold. At 1:23:40, the first explosion rips through the reactor hull. A second follows, more powerful, shattering the concrete lid that seals the core. The 2,000-ton cover is lifted like paper. Pieces of burning graphite shoot into the night sky. Inside the control room, the lights fail. Instruments go dark. No one yet understands that the reactor has been destroyed. They believe it is a hydrogen explosion, a burst pipe, something mechanical. They continue trying to pump water into a core that no longer exists. Outside, the night glows faintly blue. A column of ionized air rises from the shattered roof. Radiation pours into the atmosphere. Pripyat sleeps only 2 miles away. The wind begins to shift toward the city. The first explosion at Reactor 4 tears through the roof of the turbine hall. A second blast follows. Stronger, sharper, carrying fragments of steel and graphite into the sky. The sound rolls across the fields like distant thunder. In Pripyat, windows rattle and dogs begin to bark. Many residents wake, walk to their balconies, and stare toward the horizon. The plant is glowing. A faint blue column rising above the buildings. Some think it is beautiful. Others are afraid. Inside the control room, the operators are still trying to make sense of what has happened. Panels have gone dark. The instruments show nothing. Alarms are silent, their wiring burned out. Acrid smoke fills the air. Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov demands answers. "Where is the reactor?" he asks. Someone replies quietly, "It's gone." He refuses to believe it. He orders the operators to continue feeding water into the system, convinced the reactor is still intact. In reality, the core is open to the night sky, its fuel rods exposed, burning at over 2,000 degrees. At the nearby fire station, a phone rings. Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik answers the call. There has been an explosion at the plant. Within minutes, trucks are on the move. When the firefighters arrive, they find the roof of the turbine hall ablaze. Pieces of glowing graphite are scattered across the ground. The air carries a strange metallic taste. The men climb onto the roof without protective gear, unaware that the graphite around them is radioactive. They begin spraying water on the fire. The heat is unbearable. Their boots melt to the tarred roof. Within minutes, some begin to feel sick, vomiting, dizzy, unable to breathe. They do not know it yet, but each of them is absorbing a lethal dose of radiation. One firefighter remembers looking down at his hands and seeing them turn red. Another said later, "We thought it was just steam. We didn't understand." Back inside the plant, confusion turns to panic. The emergency lighting has failed. The corridors are filled with dust and smoke. Men are moving blindly through the dark, searching for survivors, coughing, shouting over the roar of the fire. In the reactor hall, the concrete floor has been blown apart. The fuel rods lie scattered, glowing a dull orange. The air crackles with radiation. Instruments in the control bunker measure levels so high that the needles jam at their maximum. By dawn, helicopters begin to arrive. From above, pilots see what no one on the ground can: a gaping hole where the reactor once stood and a red glow pulsing from deep inside. The Soviet Union has never seen anything like it. There are no procedures for this, no manuals, no instructions. In the city of Pripyat, life continues. Children walk to school, buses run on schedule. The amusement park, and set to open for May Day, stands ready for celebration. The people know something has happened, but they are told not to worry. Officials say it is under control. That evening, radiation readings in the city reach levels hundreds of times higher than normal. Still, no warning is given. Families open their windows to let in the spring air. Many stand outside, watching the faint blue glow over the horizon. At the plant, the fires continue to burn. For the men on the roof and in the control rooms, the danger is no longer abstract. The heat, the pain, the sickness. It all comes quickly now. By the next morning, many of the first responders will be in hospital. Some will never leave. Chernobyl's reactor has been destroyed. The radioactive plume above it is already drifting north, across Belarus, across Europe, and into history. By sunrise on April 26, 1986, the fire at Reactor 4 is still burning. The air around the plant shimmers with heat and invisible radiation. At the edge of Pripyat, smoke drifts over the rooftops, carrying dust that glows faintly in the morning light. Inside the plant, emergency crews continue to fight the flames. Water cannons sweep across the turbine hall. Graphite burns on the roof like coal. Firefighters remove their helmets to wipe the sweat from their faces, unaware that every breath is laced with radioactive particles. In the control bunker, Plant Director Viktor Bryukhanov and his deputies struggle to assess the situation. The radiation meters have jammed at their maximum reading. They assume the instruments are broken. Reports to Moscow describe a minor accident, a localized fire. The truth is worse than anyone in that room can imagine. Deputy Chief Engineer Dyatlov sits in silence, refusing to accept that the reactor has exploded. "It cannot happen," he says. "It's impossible." Yet outside, molten uranium is burning through the concrete. The core has become an open wound in the earth. By mid-morning, soldiers and security officers from the KGB arrive. They establish roadblocks and restrict movement around the plant. Doctors at the local hospital begin to receive the first wave of casualties. Plant workers and firefighters with severe burns and unexplained nausea. Their skin is flushed, their eyes swollen, their hair already falling out. The doctors have never seen radiation sickness before. In Pripyat, life continues as usual. School children line up for morning lessons. Couples shop for groceries. Some climb to the rooftops to watch the fire in the distance. The sky glows pale orange above the horizon, and a fine dust settles over the streets. No public warning is given. That evening, a delegation of party officials from Kiev arrives by helicopter. They tour the site quickly, measuring radiation with handheld dosimeters. The readings are catastrophic. Still, they order the city to remain calm. Panic, they say, is more dangerous than radiation. As night falls, the wind changes direction. Radioactive isotopes drift toward the city. Children play outside. Many begin to cough. Residents complain of headaches, a metallic taste, and nausea. The hospitals fill with patients, but no one explains why. Inside the Kremlin, reports reach Mikhail Gorbachev, incomplete, cautious, written in the careful language of bureaucracy. The cables speak of an incident, of damage contained. No one dares to write the word explosion. The Soviet Union has built its identity on strength and control. Accidents do not happen. Failure does not exist, and so the information is buried. Telephones in Pripyat are cut off. Journalists are kept away. The official line is silence. 36 hours pass before the decision is made to evacuate. On April 27th at 1 p.m., loudspeakers announce that buses will soon arrive to take residents out of the city. They are told it is temporary, 3 days at most. Bring identification, some food, and clothing, nothing more. Over 1,000 buses roll into Pripyat in long, silent columns. Families gather at street corners, holding hands, carrying children, locking their doors for the last time. Many leave pets behind. No one believes they will never return. By sunset, the city is empty. Only the sound of engines fades into the distance. In the stillness that follows, the dosimeters continue to tick. The radiation over Pripyat is now thousands of times above safe levels. To the west, Swedish scientists detect an unexplained cloud of radiation drifting over Scandinavia. They contact Moscow for an explanation. The Soviets deny everything. But the world has already begun to learn the truth. Chernobyl is no longer a local disaster. It has become global. And the silence that once protected the Soviet system is about to collapse beneath its weight. In the days that followed the explosion, Chernobyl became a battlefield. The enemy was invisible. It moved with the wind, sank into the soil, and lingered on every surface. The reactor burned for 10 days. From the open core, a steady column of smoke carried radioactive particles high into the atmosphere. Each hour, it spread farther, across Ukraine, Belarus, and into Europe. No wall could stop it. At first, the response was chaos. Local fire brigades fought the flames with water, not knowing that water only spread contamination. The air above the reactor was thick with radiation strong enough to kill a man in minutes. Even aircraft engines began to fail when flying through the plume. By April 27th, the Soviet military took command of the site. Generals, scientists, and nuclear engineers gathered in the nearby town of Chernobyl to form a crisis committee. Their orders were simple but impossible: stop the fire, contain the radiation, and prevent a second explosion. Helicopters began to drop sand, clay, and boron onto the core in an attempt to smother it. The pilots flew directly over the gaping hole, guided only by sight. They were told to keep their helicopters steady for 3 seconds over the target. Many stayed longer. They watched the ground below shimmer like liquid metal, not realizing they were flying through lethal radiation. Some of those crews would never return home. Beneath the reactor, another danger was forming. The molten core was melting through the concrete foundation, threatening to reach the underground water tanks. If it did, the resulting steam explosion could devastate much of Ukraine and Belarus. To prevent this, a group of miners from the Donbass region were brought in. They dug a tunnel beneath the reactor to install a cooling system. They worked in suffocating heat. Stripped to the waist, covered in sweat and graphite dust. No one told them the full risk. Some of them would die within years. Others would live long enough to see their children fall ill. The people who took part in these efforts would later be called liquidators. More than 500,000 soldiers, firefighters, engineers, and civilians sent to clean and contain what remained of the reactor. They removed debris by hand. They buried contaminated soil, destroyed equipment, and washed buildings with chemicals. Many were exposed to levels of radiation that would never be recorded. On the roof of Reactor 3, men worked in 90-second shifts. Their job was to shovel pieces of radioactive graphite back into the crater. Robots sent to do the same task had failed. The radiation had fried their circuits, so human beings replaced them. These workers were known as biorobots. After each shift, they stumbled down the stairs, their faces pale, their uniforms glowing faintly in the dark. At night, helicopters sprayed the surrounding forest with decontaminant. But the trees were already dying. The once green pines near the plant turned rust-colored and brittle, an area now known as the Red Forest. Nothing that grew there would be safe again. By May, the fires were extinguished. The immediate threat was contained. But the work was far from over. The reactor still emitted dangerous radiation. The nearby rivers were contaminated. Villages within 30 kilometers were evacuated and abandoned. Each day, more soldiers arrived. Each day, more were sent home sick. The official records listed few casualties. The truth was hidden behind numbers and medals. For the liquidators, there were no speeches or cameras, only orders. And in the silence that followed their work, the land itself became their monument. Chernobyl was no longer just an accident. It was an operation, one fought by men against something they could not see, could not touch, and could never truly defeat. The morning after the explosion, the first patients began to arrive at Hospital No. 126 in Pripyat. Firefighters, plant operators, and engineers were carried in on stretchers, their faces gray, their lips cracked, their eyes swollen shut. They complained of dizziness, headaches, and a bitter taste in their mouths. Some vomited constantly. The nurses thought they were burned. They didn't yet understand what radiation sickness looked like. Doctors gave them milk to drink, believing it would help. When that failed, they washed their skin and applied ointments to the burns. But the redness was not from heat. It was from the radiation itself. The damage was invisible, working from the inside out. By the afternoon, the corridors were full. Dozens of patients lay on the floor, whispering to one another, asking for water. Many of them were young. Lieutenant Pravik, the first firefighter to arrive at the scene, was only 23. His men followed him into the hospital one by one. Some joked softly, trying to keep their spirits up. Others fell silent. That evening, buses began transporting the worst cases to a medical facility in Moscow, the 6th Clinic, the top hospital for radiation treatment in the Soviet Union. The patients were stripped of their contaminated clothing and placed in isolation. Nurses wore layers of protective gear, but even so, many later became ill. One of the reactor operators who survived described those first hours. "After I got home, I took a shower and tried to eat," he said. "Then I couldn't stand up. I sat in the bathroom for half an hour, holding on to the wall. In the morning, my skin started to peel. I drank vodka because they said it helped. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't." For many, the effects came fast. Their skin blistered. Their hair fell out in handfuls. Internal organs began to fail. The doctors could do little but watch. Within weeks, 28 of the first responders were dead. Hundreds more would follow in the years ahead. Across Ukraine and Belarus, the evacuations continued. Entire villages were emptied. Buses carried families away from their homes, leaving behind their animals, their gardens, their lives. Some refused to go. Others returned secretly at night to retrieve what they could: photographs, letters, keepsakes. The soldiers called them self-settlers. In the decades that followed, the effects spread far beyond the exclusion zone. Radiation drifted across Europe, contaminating crops, livestock, and rivers. In the years ahead, thousands of cases of thyroid cancer would be traced to the accident, many in children who had consumed milk tainted with radioactive iodine. The official Soviet death toll remained low, 31. The true number will never be known. Some estimates reach into the tens of thousands, others far higher. But for those who survived, the damage was not only physical. Entire communities vanished. Pride turned to shame. The people who had once built the future were now treated like relics of a failed dream. Many liquidators grew ill but received no recognition. Some were denied medical care, told their sickness was not related to Chernobyl. A few lived long enough to speak about what they saw. Most did not. One survivor said years later, "We did what had to be done. We were soldiers, not heroes. We didn't think about dying. We thought about finishing the job." Chernobyl left behind more than ruins. It left behind silence, a silence that stretched across nations, across generations, and into the lives of those who would never set foot there, but would carry its legacy in their blood. For the Soviet Union, the accident was more than a disaster. It was a revelation that truth once buried will always find a way to rise. Today, the city of Pripyat stands empty. The streets are silent. Apartment blocks rise above the trees like monuments to a vanished time. In classrooms, children's notebooks still lie open on desks. Toys rest on the floor. Calendars remain frozen on April 1986. Nature has reclaimed what humanity left behind. Birch trees grow through the pavement. Foxes, boars, and elk roam the parks. The Ferris wheel in the amusement park, once painted bright yellow, has faded to the color of rust. It was supposed to open on May Day, 5 days after the explosion. It never did. The power plant itself is now sealed beneath a vast steel structure, the new safe confinement built to contain what remains of Reactor 4. Inside the shell lies the original sarcophagus, erected hastily by liquidators in 1986. Beneath it, the molten remains of the reactor still emit heat and radiation, slowly decaying, never entirely at rest. Each day, thousands of sensors monitor the site. Engineers work in rotating shifts to prevent further contamination. Decades after the explosion, the work of containment continues. Chernobyl has not ended. It has only changed shape. For the survivors, the memory has not faded either. Many of them still live in nearby towns. Some have returned to the outer edge of the exclusion zone, unwilling to leave the land they once called home. They tend small gardens, raise chickens, and speak of the past in quiet tones. One man who was there that night visits every year. He stands at the perimeter fence and looks toward the concrete dome. He does not call himself a hero. He says only, "We did our duty." His hands tremble slightly as he speaks. He pauses, then adds, "We don't need pity, just understanding." The monuments around the zone bear few names. The firefighters, the plant workers, the soldiers. Most are remembered not by plaques, but by the stories told about them. Their graves are scattered across Ukraine and Russia, marked simply by dates that end too soon. For years, the Soviet government tried to bury the truth. But the fallout could not be contained by borders or ideology. It drifted across Europe and into history. When the truth finally emerged, it revealed more than a technical failure. It showed the cost of silence, the danger of pride, and the fragility of human control.